First, I appreciate the opportunity to come here and discuss one of my favorite topics. What I'll do, Dean's covered the sort of the bigger picture issue fairly well. But what I'll do is address at least a couple of other drivers, at least conceptual drivers, for why the PLA and the broader party state infrastructure has been embarked down this path to develop a kinetic kill anti-satellite capability as well as a missile defense capability. Then go a bit into some of the at least ideas or hypotheses behind development of operational requirements and technical requirements, and then cap it off by at least informed speculation on how a R&D effort would be organized, as well as technology acquisition could be organized. Starting off with the drivers, Dean covered the deterrence aspect well. When you look at sort of the history of where some of these ideas began on developing this capability, 1964 could go back as far as 1964 with the old 640 program. That include an anti-satellite capability as well as a missile defense capability. And with the idea being, if former Soviet Union, United States can develop these capabilities, and by God, we should as well. At a minimum, have some sort of an idea on what they're doing, and doing that through their own independent program. My impression is toward the latter part of the Cultural Revolution, well, let's say 70, 71 time frame, the program appeared to have been terminated. Then getting around to the 80s, there are some indications that the program was resurrected, and in large part reflected in what was called the 863 program. It could be viewed, at least in some ways, as a mirroring of the U.S. Strategic Defense Initiative or perhaps the European Eureka program. But regardless, a key driver behind the 863 program, just one key driver, was being able to maintain some nuclear deterrent capability, which would be inclusive of some form of missile defense as well as anti-satellite capabilities. Another possible driver, again going back to that Mao dictum, is simply whatever the West can do, we can do. It could just simply be, well, if they're going to do it, then by God, we should do it as well. But putting these drivers to the side, a key question that one should begin with is, who's the owner? In other words, within the bureaucratic organization, it's easy to say the PLA is developing this, or the PRC writ large, or the Chinese Communist Party writ large. But in order to understand what they're exactly doing and the whys and the wheres and the whos and hows and all that, the sponsor is critical. In other words, what staff officer, what acquisition agency is overseeing the program? What acquisition agency developed the TTP, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, and who did the concept development, program validation, everything that would have fed into a final approval to move toward an engineering R&D program. And there are several candidates. I don't think it's really been determined yet, and one could speculate, but one leading candidate could be the General Armaments Department. Within the PLA, you have 4 general departments: General Staff Department, roughly equivalent to our Joint Staff; General Political Department, which we don't really have a counterpart to; the General Logistics Department, which could generally be the logistics infrastructure; and then the General Armaments Department. The General Armaments Department has a lot of the space responsibilities today. They have a space launch tracking and control network. Bear in mind that the space tracking network generally is geared toward cooperative, I won't say targets, but cooperative flight vehicles, space flight vehicles. But the GAD is also where testing would be done. For example, the 2007 test, I believe, was conducted out of Xichang Satellite Launch Center, which is a GAD facility. I'm guessing they also probably would have used in previous tests. Perhaps they would have used Jiuquan or one of the other space launch facilities. But GAD is a possible candidate. But that doesn't answer the question, though. If they're going to be the sponsor of a program, theoretically they would also be the user. And you look within GAD, and do you see signs? Because normally when you move toward an engineering R&D program, at least based on the model established by the 2nd Artillery Force, their strategic rocket force, strategic nuclear forces, you generally, when you enter the R&D, engineering R&D program, you're going to set up an operational test and evaluation unit that would oversee and work with the entire industrial research and development infrastructure to be able to ensure smooth integration of that capability into the active force. Another candidate would be, of course, General Staff Department, because General Staff Department does have their own organic assets, for example, helicopter assets, certainly signals intelligence, as well as a whole range of other capabilities. But even within GAD, there doesn't appear to be a belly button, so to speak, for this, at least not from the research that I've seen. Another candidate would be the Air Force, and this is a strong candidate. There are indications that the Air Force, within their engineering research or equipment research academy, does have a cell that looks at missile defense. The question, though, is how do they distinguish missile defense? Is it terminal missile defense, or is it missile defense that would go after targets above 100 kilometers, which is the rough demarcation where air transitions over into space? And there does appear to be some distinguishing between these capabilities. Who's got the terminal defense mission and who can have the strategic air and space defense mission. But another candidate could be Second Artillery. Second Artillery, in their writings, they do claim to be developing what they call a space operations force. They have logistics infrastructure to be able to acquire and then maintain some of the capabilities based on their, for example, their missile force, medium-range ballistic missiles. But again, there doesn't appear to be a lot out there that would indicate a unit that has been established that would be an operational test and evaluation unit that would be established to be able to integrate a capability into the active force. All that to the side, let's assume one of these, for notionally, let's say Air Force or GAD. A program theoretically could have begun, let's say 1986, when at least they began some of the preliminary research into the capabilities that would be fed into a program. They would have had, for example, under the 863 program, their extra budgetary funding that would go into mastering certain types of technologies that would be fed into this, all the way from propulsion to guidance technologies, for example, RF, millimeter wave, for example, or imaging infrared, these sorts of things. And they would have special working groups under the old 863, what would have been known, I believe, as a 419 program, but changed in 2002 to, I believe it's the 863-8 focus area, and under there, for example, maybe the 863-801 program, that would focus on the technologies that would go in, particularly on the guidance technologies that would go into this capability. Now, at the same time, you have a parallel infrastructure for basic technology acquisition that would feed into this, and just in terms of program validation to make sure it's worth the money to move into engineering R&D. And that would be within the GAD S&T Committee, Science Technology Committee, expert working group, that focuses in areas such as precision guidance, again, propulsion or solid rocket motoring, issues like this. Regardless, once there's confidence that the basic technologies have been mastered and that the risk is manageable in terms of investing that money into engineering R&D, then theoretically, that whoever is a sponsor would have taken that and developed and gone before a board that most likely would consist of representatives from the Central Military Commission as well as the State Council. Perhaps it's called the Central Special Commission or something like that. That would include representatives from both the CMC party and then the State Council that oversees the industrial infrastructure. So, hypothetically speaking, let's say they made a decision in the wake of the 16th Party Congress in 2002 to go ahead and make the investment, assign a program manager within one of the sort of the acquisition organization responsible, and then they select within the industrial research and development system a lead systems integrator. And it appears to be the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, or CASIC for short, Second Academy. The Second Academy traditionally has been the air defense guys. They produce a series of air defense missiles and supporting radar systems in what's called the Hongqi, or the red flag series. But the Hongqi missile, that's what they come out with, the Hongqi 2, for example, which is an SA-2 knockoff. There's some speculation that the interceptor could be called the HQ. You've seen references to HQ 419, which would go back to, for example, that 863-419 program. or sometimes you'll see HQ-19, and there's different designations. If it's called an HQ, though, then that could lead one to suspect it could be PLA Air Force, because that tends to be the designation that they often use, but not a guarantee. But within that state council, SASTN, which is the State Administration for Industry, as well, technology, they would have selected, together with the sponsor, they would have selected what they call the dual command. They established a dual command system, which would include a chief designer as well as a chief program manager. And these two, the chief designer would be responsible for the technical aspects, and then the program manager would be responsible for a lot of the budgeting and programming and arranging the testing. A chief designer most likely would be within the second academy, aka CASIC Second Academy. Most likely would be from their design bureau, the second design bureau. The program manager possibly could be a deputy director of CASIC as a whole, or deputy director of Second Academy. They would work closely with whoever the customer is, whether it's GAD or Air Force or whatever. But here they would form a team that would be focused on the different components. For example, the propulsion side, the solid motor, that would be fast enough to be able to get to the target in a rapid way as possible. They could use existing motors, for example, a DF21 motor or DF31, depending on size, but odds are they probably want to develop a whole new motor. And that would lead one toward, in terms of this particular subsystem, perhaps CASIC 066 base in Hubei, or perhaps CASIC 6th Academy up in Inner Mongolia that has a record of doing solid motor work. Or they could cross over into another corporate enterprise to the CASC, China Aerospace Science Technology Corporation, 4th Academy that does your larger motors. But more likely it's going to be kept within the CASIC family. On the guidance side, odds are they could either have within the Second Academy a particular research institute that would be the lead on this, or they could again go over to another corporate enterprise and have, for example, another research institute under the First Academy that could take the lead for it. But regardless, once they sort of embark upon coming up with a prototype, once they enter the engineering R&D, develop a prototype, they got to test it. They'll do ground tests first, for example, the motor, static ground tests of the motor, perhaps modeling simulation of the guidance system, and then eventually they'll need to do a full-range flight test. This most likely was reflected in what we saw in 2007. Apparently there were 2 tests before that. They didn't go quite as well, but that would have led into that particular test. So theoretically the test would have been, if they're still in the engineering R&D phase, that would have been led by industry, not necessarily the sponsor. The sponsor is certainly going to be there, but that would mean in terms of the driver organizationally for that test could have been the industry working with GAD that manages the test facilities and can evaluate the testing. So, I mean, that's sort of an overview of how this all works. Once they're satisfied with the test that they feel that the customer is confident that it can work, then they'll take it back up to that central special committee for what they call dingxing, which would be basically, I'm not sure what the U.S. term would be, but it's locking in the design, locking in that particular design. It gets critical design review. It could be in our engineering system, but it's basically saying that it's okay and we're ready to enter into low rate initial production. At that point, that's when and of course that one unit that's been assigned as the operation test and evaluation unit would have been involved at all stages, and that's when they could be theoretically, if that decision has been made, begin to integrate it into the active force. And if that first test was 2007, if it was successful, if they've launched a second one and perhaps looking at a third one, eventually the tests will move over from being industrial-type tests supporting engineering R&D and moving over into the operational test and evaluation unit that's doing it, which would be the actual PLA unit that would be have to take the lead, again working in conjunction with the industry. And then they would move into the full. But in terms of in laying all this out, there's just a lot of things that we still don't know. Starting with simply who is the sponsor, who's the customer. It's not PLA is a big organization. Within the PLA is it GAD, is it Air Force, the Second Artillery, and then from there, odds are, whoever it is, there's probably a unit out there that's been established that is the operational unit. If they haven't established that unit yet, then one could question, at what point would they establish that unit? Theoretically, it should be out there already. But that's sort of an overview on the issue, at least from the engineering side, and we can take questions afterwards. Thank you very much.